In today's video, I'm going to be explaining you guys one of the most important questions you have to ask yourselves when playing poker, and that is, what is my opponent's range? Now, if we look in the solver for what we should do, that what is driven by various variables, of which one of the most important ones is equity. The amount of equity we have incentivizes us to take certain actions like checking or betting, and the type of hands that we are incentivized to be betting. So if equity drives our actions and the range we face determines the equity, one of the most important questions we have to ask ourselves when playing a poker hand is, what is my opponent's range? A solver can teach us a lot of valuable information about how optimal play looks like. However, the way a solver constructs its ranges is often very different than the ranges that are constructed in practice. Different range, different equities, which means that we get different incentives and often a higher EV strategy occurs. Let's look at the solver for an example. Now, the example that we're going to look at is a big blind versus button turn probing example on this 8-7-4. It's going to go check, check, and we are going to be stabbing the turn. And in order to estimate what the highest EV strategy for out of position is going to be, we have to know the equities, and in order to know the equities, we have to estimate the ranges. So let's start with the solver check-back range. I gave it a half pot c-bet sizing, which is a very common sizing that you will see in game on these low boards. And for that, it can bet around 52%. Now, often in spots, let's say for example you study population data, you might see that the percentage is close to the same. However, on the next street, so in this case the turn probe line, the percentage is suddenly different, and this says a lot about the strength of the range construction. If we look at the range that in position is supposed to be checking back, it is going to be a protected range. Okay, it's going to check back certain hands in order to disincentivize the out of position from doing a lot of stabbing, because that would cost us our equity realization as in position. And in the end, we want to realize as much equity as possible with our strategy. Aces, for example, kings is usually checking, but also a lot of top pairs. I would say around 50% of the top pairs are going into the check. A tiny bit of set or two pairs is also check back. And overall, it's going to be quite protected. So let's look at the turn deuce. A deuce is a card that doesn't really change any of the equities. And this is the turn stabbing strategy in theory, right? The GTO. Now you could just study this example and be like, okay, so on the turn, we should mainly be probing, looks like a bit more on the polarized side, big bet check. I gave it a pot, the 40% and a 2E, 2E in this case being 230%. So yeah, you could learn from that, but then you're not really, then you're kind of missing the point, okay? This is our turn strategy based on an amount of equity that we have, which in this case is 47.8%. And this equity is determined on the range construction that in position has done, as we just shown. It was protected. So the more or less protected in position's checking range is going to be, so if we go to the flop, the more he will, for example, bet top pair, bet an overpair, and the more he will check back high cards, the higher equity is going to be on, for example, a deuce turn, which changes our incentive. In this case, spoiler alert, usually we get to bet more hands, right? Because we have an overall equity advantage. The same is also true if, for example, in position would never bet the flop and would just carry all its hands to the turn. Then suddenly our turn equity will be way lower and we're less incentivized to bet, okay? And this is purely because of the range construction that we are facing. Now, another thing we will then often see is, let's say in this case we bet pot. Pop, in this case you will see solvers folding around 44% of the time. Now, these are spots where you can look at data of population and you actually see that population on average is going to be overfolding this node. Now, an overfold is going to happen for two reasons. First of all, the topic that we're discussing, it's a range construction error. The hands that the solver is calling or raising are simply not in the range. Let's say the sets that we talked about are the two pair, the top pair, the overpairs. They could be less in Vinland's range, or they're simply folding hands that are calls. It's usually a little bit of a mix in both, but especially the range construction mess up leads to an overfold being the case, okay? So what is, if we know that, okay, then what is going to be the actual strategy that we want to use? And as a more general concept, what are kind of things that change in our strategy, and how can we learn things from that we can use in other spots as well. So for that, we have to go to the node lock function and we make him bet less strong hands. Now I already did that for you. So imagine this is the current range. We're incentivized to step around 42% of the time. We're checking 57. Whereas if we node lock the range from this to this, which is betting more overpairs, betting more top pairs, checking back more high cards. Now, if we look at our turn equity, has increased. We now have 49.2. It's a small increase, but we can now invest more money in the pot. As we can see, we're checking 57. Now we're only checking 44. And especially what happens usually in these kind of scenarios is that basically if people construct their ranges poorly, we can just bet our hand for what it is. We can just literally do whatever our hand wants to do because we're no longer restricted in terms of equity. Mainly in terms of 4x, 7x, 5s and 6s. These hands can now bet for a smallish sizing, 40% or 30% or even a quarter, depending on how your opponent constructed his range and how your opponent reacts. Simply to get some thin value and protection versus a range that is now more high card driven. Whereas in the GTO example, or let's say someone would check back range, even a more extreme example, we cannot bet 5s, 6s, 4, 7 too often because we're simply investing in a range that will contain better 7x than ours, more 8x, more overpairs, and we're simply building a pot while we have an equity, or less of an equity advantage than we have now. Now, another thing that we will often see in this kind of scenarios is if the checking range of our opponent is left unprotected, especially by nutted hands, that we will have an increase in big sizings, okay? Now in this case, the big sizing is only used 5% of the time. It's also being divided between a very big check raise versus delay. This is another way that we can utilize this huge range advantage, but overall it's going pot most often and it's just gonna increase its overall betting frequency. But mainly if strong hands are no longer within his range, or not that hands are no longer within his range, we're usually no longer restricted in the big sizing that we get to use. This is another very common consequence you see of weak range constructions. Now, what did we learn from this example? Always ask yourself, what is Vinen's range? Figure out if, and if so, how they're screwing up compared to theory, and what the consequences for our strategy is going to be. And in this example we showed, usually it's an increase in equity, and therefore we're incentivized to bet more hands both for protection and bigger and more aggressive for value. Making mistakes in range construction is one of the two most important reasons why leaks occur. Then what often happens is that the range construction is too weak, leading players to overfold. Or another example, when the range construction is messed up, an over or under bluff spot will occur. Now let's jump into the tables for a live play and explain session with an extra focus on what is my opponent's range and how can we deviate accordingly. We're going to be jumping into two tables of Tournament.nl Zoom, trying to figure out to the best of our abilities if we can find more information about what Vinen's range actually is and the consequences that will have to our strategy. But before we start though, quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement, because we have currently reopened our application process for the Mechanics of Poker. For the next few weeks you can apply, get a chance to get accepted and work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career. If you're interested in that, go over to mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. Link also down below in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the action. You can two-tone. You can play this board in various ways, to be honest. This one we can sometimes call, sometimes 3-bet. I think on the turn, you should probably keep on betting. Went for a 3/4 sizing. We could also go for an overbet, I think, when the straight is on the flop. Here we face actually a very big bet. Don't really know who this guy is, but 80-something%. Quite a hefty bet sizing. But so far, so easy, and probably just a call down. When he snap checks, so timing is also a way that we can better estimate Vinen's range. And I feel like if he had a better hand than King 8, he would probably at least think about it. So I think we have a very clear value bet here. And I was completely off. Could actually be a recreational player with the sizing scheme and the fact that he played his jack this way. But I think in general, this was not a recreational player. I feel like this read is pretty accurate. Versus them from 2.5 to 10, I think we can just call most of our pairs. So with that. And I will probably be peeling my lowest pair here to probably 3s and then maybe 4 some of the time. I feel like, for example, 6s might be a good hand to fold. And turn, I think, fold. Especially with a diamond. Five, 7, 5 is actually a pretty good board for the big blind. Could actually have, in theory, some leads. But usually players don't lead, so what is my opponent's range? Let's say you would look at the solve and the range has leads, and then we see check, and then we see our strategy. Our strategy will actually look different. He actually snap checked, we saw on the turn. I think he's giving away some information here about his range. So actually I'm gonna make a small block. I think he's going to have nothing or a worse ace high very often. But basically, if he doesn't have a donk bet range, he checks everything towards us. We should definitely lower our c-betting frequency. So if you just think about it, well, if you would have donk bets, it's likely that when he checks to us, he doesn't have a donk bet range. That he actually has more equity, so we should actually check more. And on the turn, again, if you would just look at the solver range is intact. So maybe we would, most likely we would just always check ace queen. Given the fact that he snap checked, I think he's very likely to just have a worse ace high than us. Let's say at king jack, I could check as king jack or ace king. But I think queens is just the hand that has the least downsides. Here, again, we face the snap check. I would say his range is going to be weak and quite made hand heavy. Could have, obviously, still a weak jack that he checks, but I feel like it's a bit more unlikely. But what is Vinen's range? Well, Vinen's range seemed quite weak there, given the way that he played his hand. And I decided to throw the bet there with the ace 10. You can obviously also check ace 10. Especially if you're playing an overbet, which I will usually do in this spot. But also, for example, I feel like there was also a spot where if you snap checks, you can basically just bet the strength of your hand. So let's say you have a hand who wants to bet for protection. Just bet for protection. Let's say you have a hand who's pretty good. Just bet pretty big. Because I feel like with the timing on the turn, his range is no longer like a solver range, for example. So immediately we got a couple of spots where, given timing, it said something about Vinen's range, and we could take advantage of that. Turn, I'm going to be playing a polarized strategy. Yeah, it's a bit close, but I rolled quite high. So, but especially on a 9 turn, we're not very incentivized to bet a 4 or pocket 5s. So my general approach here is going to be polarized. Okay, I'm gonna be doing a lot of checking and big betting with my strong hands, or not completely true. And big bet with like decent top pair plus. Here, he doesn't make it that big. I'm tempted to call with the recreational limping. I don't usually call here that much. But in this situation, there's 3.5. It's very close, but so far this guy doesn't really seem that aggressive. I think it's okay. This one we can sometimes 3-bet. This time. Get called. If he now barrels, I'm probably out. He could have a 10, he could have a straight, he could have a lot of equity. His barreling range, I feel like it's going to be very strong. He should probably add a lot of unnatural type of bluffs to the barreling range. So I feel like snap fold versus someone who's a bit less creative. It is actually another spot where I feel like range are very unbalanced. We continue on a theme that we talked about in terms of what is the range. I feel like here you can just basically just bet the size that your hand is worth, especially the how fast he checked the turn. I feel like it's very ace high heavy or pocket sixes or something like that. So yeah, if you have a hand that wants to bet Tim for value, bet Tim for value. If you have a hand like the one that I have that's strong enough, go for an overbet. So the 5, if he had a 5, he should probably c-bet it, and I have way more 5x than he has in the first place. So I'm actually gonna go for an overbet. We can probably just bet 150, I think that's fine. And bet like king, queen plus or something. I think that's a fine strategy. If you think the check back range is definitely on the weaker side, then I feel like just blocking, for example, 8-7. Like the more hands, the more weak and less protected this check back range is going to be, the more we can just bet the size of our hand. I feel like on the river I'm gonna give up. I actually didn't expect him to have that hand, to be honest. This one we can bet some of the time. I'm gonna bet it this time. Okay, he made quite a loose call. I didn't expect him to make that call, to be honest. On the turn, on the turn, what do we do on the turn? Got an overbet. I feel like I'm gonna play overbet checker on this turn. Queen 10 can probably go in there. I had to call the ace jack that time. Calling with the king 10 suited. Depending on sizing, we can continue. I think half pot. Oh, half pot's very close. I feel like all options here are valid versus half pot. Gonna go for the call. I think turn is an easy lead on a 7. Pocket 5s. We're deeper. I'm actually going to call. I feel like on a 7, that's our strategy here. Or we're gonna do quite a lot of blocking again, but I don't feel like king 10 is a block. Off pot is a bit of a weird size. Feels like I have 9-10, jack 10, jack 9, 6-5. I'm just trying to fold out your nothing. Like I said. So, what... And this is something that you will see more at lower stakes. He was just betting basically betting the size of his hands. He just figured, well, you have nothing. I don't have to bet bigger than half pot to bluff nothing. But that's not really how poker works. And this is a spot where, for example, these type of players, when they bet very big, then they suddenly have it. So his half pot will be always bluff, and his bigger bet will always be value. And this is definitely, like, if I would be playing more often, I would definitely make a note there of this guy. But okay, not going to. Here I'm gonna have two sizings on the river, probably a 3/4 and a jam. I feel like Jack 8 probably makes it in the jam, but it's very close. What here I think is a good sizing. I feel like I should maybe check raise now. 9-10-6. It's a bit close here. This hand goes in a 3/4 or a jam. King High flush definitely goes in a jam. Ace High flush goes in a jam. Maybe it's a bit thin also. Let's see. And a 10-6. Feel like we should now jam. Because basically there we're repping a 6. And the 6 is probably going to be very high in equity. And if we're only betting a 6 or better, then the sizing that 6 or better type of range is worth is probably a jam. And in terms of bluffs, we could maybe bluff a turn flush draw, or we could bluff some straight draw. I think bluffing a under pair there on the turn is actually also not bad. Let's say a pocket deuces or something. 9s here I'm going to call. His sizing wasn't very big. And usually if we're a bit deeper and if you 3-bet a pair. But 9s, I usually want a little bit lower, a little bit higher. But hey, we're here now. Ace 5-4. If I have a heart here, I will continue. If I don't have a heart, I will usually fold. That's kind of the heuristic to use in these type of scenarios. So easy call. And on the turn, he's probably gonna have to check range. In my experience, players will have a betting range on the turn a bit more often, which leaves their checking range a little bit weaker. So I would have definitely played that bet. And in terms of what's his range, this is just going to be my general read. And how can you get this read? So you can study population, look at lines, and you'll see fold numbers again being higher than normal, which usually indicates an error in range construction that's mainly on the turn. I think on the turn he has 0 bets. So when people do bet that turn, very likely that that range is pretty strong. To go back to the Jack 8 suited on the river, I said we have 2 sizings here. And how do you know if you have 2 sizings? Well, you have to look at the incentives, the type of value hands that you want to be betting. So let's say I have aces there. probably want to bet, but I probably don't want to jam. But I also have some river nuts, flushes and stuff that I do probably want to jam. So that's how I knew I was a split. And then probably your biggest bets are going to be driven around blocking the nuts. So let's say you had ace jack with the ace of diamonds, maybe queen jack with the queen of diamonds, something like that. And then your smaller bets are going to be maybe hand like queen jack without a diamond, for example. But yeah, going back to my pocket 10 story and the eights. Basically, when the bigger someone goes, let's say in raise, the less attractive call becomes. So the more you're gonna lean towards 3-betting, and it's the same for 4-betting. The smaller he 3-bets, the higher the EV of call becomes. And the bigger he 3-bets, the less interested we are in calling. Kind of the whole idea behind that. New pocket 9s. First, what I feel like is a recreational min raise, not full stacked. Here on the turn, in very tight positions, there's no incentive to bet, for example, pocket 8s for protection or something. We're gonna go more polar. We're either gonna be bluffing or betting a king, I would say, in this spot. Your bluffs are mainly going to come from like the lower pairs. Let's say you have pocket 5s. I think that would be a good bluff. Okay, you're usually going to be betting low pairs and king X. That's kind of how this spot will play. I don't expect much check raises here. So then, let's say I did turn some decent equity in, say at ace 10 of diamonds. I feel like I can bet that as well. These type of higher equity holdings become more checks in spots where you expect more check raises. Mr. Big Stealer in the house. Hello to Mr. Big Stealer. Just gonna make a small bet here with the ace 5. And actually probably going to barrel with an overcard to the king. And I feel like, especially ace highs versus recreationals, it's going to be very valuable as I expect them to check call, for example, twice with 9-10 with a club or something. So unfortunately, he goes for the min raise. King Jack this deep. Probably gonna call some of the time, 3-bet some of the time. This time I hold a 3-bet. But I don't want to be 3-betting too much. Do want to be big blinds deep out of position. But we do have a suited hand, so I feel like that's going to be fine. Flop is probably just a bet with King Jack. Don't really see anything else that we're going to do with this hand. This flop we can play in two ways. The queen 10 to... I'm gonna just throw out a 1/3 c-bet here. He's gonna go for a raise, utilizing the fact that I probably don't have deuces and 5s, but this is that same guy that jammed and also the raise very big, so this actually can just be a recreational. Five, 6. I'm gonna mix in a barrel with the 5-6. I feel like on the turn, we probably have a fold. Depends if our king is sometimes live. How much value we're gonna get. It's very close. And I do feel like now we have a mandatory barrel here with our 5-6. Let's say we had 5-6 of clubs. I think that's probably the barrel. 5-6 of clubs, 5-6 of spades, blocking, so like some queen and 5 suited, queen 6 suited. Other than that, you're probably going to be looking at like some lower pairs. So I figured that like some of these low suited connectors, if I did open them, I'm probably going to barrel the turn. And on the river, I think it's a mandatory bluff. It's a board where you can do a bit of everything. You can implement some big bets, you can implement a lot of small bets. I don't think you want to play big bet only. We'll probably reserve that for the two-tone version of this board. Easy check on the turn. Easy jam here with the ace king versus 60 big blinds. He goes for the block. We have an easy raise. So far, everything's so standard. What are we raising here? Are we raising nines? Or raising ace 8? If so, half pot is probably appropriate. If not, we only raise a 10, it's probably 3/4. I'm gonna go for a bigger raise. Here's suited 2.5x, 200 an L. Not sure. Probably a fold. I'll do it 50-50. Just to prevent myself from making a big mistake. Always same with the 9-8. I have no clue in this rake structure if these are calls, yes or no. But they do both feel close, so I'll roll it. If I make a mistake, I only made the mistake half of the time. Queen 3 is a call. Probably twice. 8-9, probably a fold. The low gutter first 3/4. He bets pots, which I think is a decent, like an appropriate bet size. What is better? What is better? Yeah, we have a lot of pair plus draw. We have Jack X of spades. We have Jack 10, for example. That's already better than Queen 3. We have Queen 9. That's better. Queen 3 is better than Queen 6. King Queen is better. Very close. Call this 50-50 again because I honestly have no clue. He was very close. First button, I think easy call. First cutoff. First MP, it's an easy fold. First cutoff, it's just, yeah, it's very close. So then, like I said, calling it some of the time. And you're not doing that because you don't want to... Okay, maybe... Like you're not doing that for the exact solver considerations. But you're doing that simply because you're not really sure. And you don't want your bias to make you always call, always fold in this type of spots. Because then your natural bias will start to show. So you might not have a leak in this exact scenario. But if always when it's close you press fold or press call on the long term, it can become a leak. In terms of, it's quite interesting. So we tanked for quite a bit actually on the turn. To think about if he would be thinking about what our range is. Oh, we probably have a hand that's a bit like ours, or we have something like Jack 9, Jack 10. If we don't balance our timing there, I definitely think we can give away some information. Here at the A7, we can do a couple of things here. A7 specifically, I'm gonna go for the check, which is actually in hindsight a very bad idea. My first instinct was to block, but then I thought, oh, maybe keep some ace accent, but that's obviously not a great idea because if a river is an ace, we have 3 pair, and 3 pair, last time I checked, is not a very strong hand in poker. And I feel like now my hand's just worth a 3/4. Especially again, he sort of snap check turn. I feel like he's gonna be very ace high or low pair. Now, even just ace high heavy, very hard to get value. So maybe I should have just adjusted my sizing for the fact that I feel like he's gonna have ace high way more often with the snap check on the turn. Hi guys, Rene aka The Wacko here with a quick Mechanics of Poker 2.0 announcement. Because we are currently open to receive 10 new players in our Mechanics of Poker coaching program. In our program, you will get access to 80+ hours of content in which we will explain you all aspects needed in order to become a more successful poker player. Now, one of these, of course, is the technical aspect of the game, in which I'll be explaining you all the mechanics behind poker strategies. We'll be talking about GTO, exploitive play, with an extra focus on the why behind certain strategies and why the population has certain leaks. And to increase your win rate even further, we've recently added a river bluff and bluff catching section so you can increase your EV when those pots become very big. Our mindset and performance coach, Adam Carmichael, he took care of the mental game and performance section of this program, in which he will teach you everything you need to know in order to break through limiting beliefs, better handle your emotions, break free from tilt, and play your A game more consistently. And last but not least, we've added the management and optimization section in the program, in which we will give you various tips and tricks to make it more likely for your poker career to succeed, and how to continuously improve as a poker player. Now, on top of that, this concept is continuously evolving based on feedback and suggestions we get from our community. Next to all this content, you will have access to our exclusive Discord community, monthly live Q&A calls, and one-on-one coaching session in which we are going to be reviewing if you have been implementing the stuff that we teach you in the mechanics of poker correctly. So do you think you have what it takes to master the mechanics of poker? And will you take one of the 10 available seats? Go over to mechanicsofpoker.com and apply for the program, and maybe you will get a chance to work with me and Adam and make more progress in your poker career.
Queen 7 suited, easy overcall. Check, check. If we know that this guy has c-betting range, sometimes these are spots where if he bets a lot of his strongest on the flop, and they both do that, you can step very wide here. I'm not really sure if that's the case, so I'm gonna not go too crazy, but I think Queen 7, yeah. I could definitely see a stab here making sense with how players usually play. But he will not really check back at Jack that often. And if he just also has a c-betting range and bets too much Jack-X plus on the flop, then basically if it goes checked around, I think as big blind we should do a lot of stabbing. So actually if I would play this hand again, I would have actually liked the stab. So I think this is a good example of me not thinking about what are the ranges. And yeah, I feel like we should have just stabbed this. And this is a spot where if you just play on autopilot, you check. If you actually think about what is Finn's range, and you try to start paying attention, then you might actually find a stab there on the turn to be very profitable. This hand can go either way. I'm gonna go for the call this time. There's the Jackal new guy that I have no clue what it is in the big blind, so leaves me a bit more towards call. Easy fold over the a6. Easy check here with the ace-9. We can now probably start betting ace-9. Mr. Gold did think about it for a little while on the turn. Calls. Interesting. This tree. This board's starting to become a little bit more connected than I think the board that we had earlier where we went to 5-6. So I'm actually going to be doing quite a lot of checking here and betting big. King 9 of diamonds. Fine hand to make a big bet. And big in this case for me is 3/4. I think we probably have a barrel. The 9 is not great. But the king is. So check back, this is actually a spot that we have discussed. Where if the range is weaker, we're way more incentivized to bet. So under that motto, I feel like betting is okay. This is definitely a bit more exploitative. Because in theory, the check back range is going to be way more protected. Folds. And folding there is, I mean, I was gonna say it's a thing, but it's not really a thing, to be honest. And that's usually a consequence because of the range. But let's say, for example, I would play versus, no offense, I mean, I don't know this player, but let's say I play versus a guy who I know is a good player. I would definitely not have bet that hand. King 3, these turn 3x are actually hands that get bet. Sometimes in a big bet, I would prefer to have a lower 3. It's close. I'll go for the check. If I had a lower 3, I would definitely bet. But I feel like when we do check, we could maybe check raise this and delay. But if it goes check, 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 I think we should just be checking down. And the king 10 easy bet. Pocket fours with a recreation on the big blind. It's on the lower side. Call it's 50-50. And here, check, check, bet. I'm tempted. Seven, 8. We're quite deep. Again, I'm gonna call this 50-50. We're being sucked in with the fucking pocket fours. We were considering folding. Then we figured out 50-50 is probably a call. Then we get squeezed. 50-50 probably a call. And that's how you get squeezed in. Should have just folded in the first place. Queen Jack, if you think about what's Villain's range there, he betted really quick on the river. Let's say he would have thought about it a little bit more and thrown out like a half pot. It feels way more like 8s, 9s, 10s. But now he was mainly going towards, I check back a queen twice or I have a decent jack. And I didn't really believe the story. And again, I also feel like in general, check back ranges or the passive ranges tend to just be a little bit weaker, especially at I'm calling this lower stakes, like low to mid stakes. I know it's not really low stakes and the level here is very competitive, but just talking about general population tendency. $3-7-4, again a board that's supposed to get lead. People don't lead and they basically check range. We should also be doing a lot of checking. This is definitely one of them. Ace Queen suited versus jam, probably fold in these positions. Jamming range can definitely contain Ace King, Queens. Don't think we should be folding this hand. Say it's close. call this time. Ace queen, I'm gonna go for a call. X is king 5, 3, 4, 5. This ace queen off, I should have probably 3-bet in hindsight. I don't mind calling versus cutoff, but first EPMP, I think ace queen off. Just always be a 3-bet. As played, I think we have to just keep on checking. 3-betting the queens. You could sometimes, when you get very deep, and the guy here in the big blind is 100 BB deep, you could sometimes call and basically back raise. And queens, I think, is a jam. I would say hands that you start calling would be a bit lower, like jacks, or a bit higher, like kings. I feel like queens is probably the best hand to jam. We're a bit deeper though. Actually a bit close. Jacks, I think, is always a call. King's always a jam, ace something to call. Yeah, and that ace queen hand I played quite badly. Has to be said. Not going to check raise. I expect the recreational to 3-bet the flop way more often than a professional. It would obviously not be great if that happens with 5-4. And 3-betting here with kings and easy fold turn. Deuces, I'm gonna go for the overcall. Actually lead this board, why not? Now we have to throw the donkey from time to time. And that's mainly because my overcall range here is gonna be 80% pocket pairs between the deuce and the 8. Yeah, seems like a quite a good board for that. Or I could also have a suited connector like 5-4 suited, 5-6 suited. I think on the turn deuces is probably a check without the club. Wouldn't mind getting frisky with 3s. 8s would actually be the most sexy hand. The deuce is not very sexy. Ace king in these positions, super tight. I don't think getting in ace king here is going to be a great idea. I think ace king suited is actually going to get it in some of the time. But we rolled on the lower side, so we're just going to call. Ace king off, I think, is definitely always a call here. This is half pot bet, which actually is third sizing on this board. Gonna be doing a lot of jamming versus half, I would say, but ace king, I think, just gonna call, and we can just call any turn. Continue on with our lives. If he checks, check. Again, I feel like if you feel like what's his range, this is a spot where people, I think, are a bit unbalanced. So I'm gonna jam. Expect to get a lot of folds. In theory, you should definitely mix in a lot of turn checks with strong hands. You're mainly going to be checking the flush draw ones. So let's say you have aces with the ace of heart, ace of clubs, kings with the ace of heart, ace of clubs. You're going to be checking that on the turn. You check quite fast, and I feel like you can just close your eyes and jam there and get a lot of folds. When the board is that quote scary, people are just going to be too greedy with their value hands and not wanting you to pot control tens, jacks, queens, and you know, not wanting to play a river, and they're just gonna be jamming it in. So I feel like on the turn, if he checks, you can just bet your hand. Give it 7.5. I'm actually going to fold this hand some of the time. Fold higher. I'm going to call. Tens I would probably never fold, but nines, 8s, 7s, 6s are definitely rolls, I would say. On turn king, we probably check a lot. and nines is probably one of the first hands that we will be checking. This is not, I don't think this is the correct sizing from his side. I'm not sure actually. Doesn't feel like it. Probably it is. You're trying to make all these pairs without the spade indifferent. Now we can probably lead. This is a very weird hand. And if he raises, he's full of shit. We got a call. What did he call with? That is the question. It's king. Alright, 3-bet face called 4-bet. I have this guy as a recreational. Okay. So far. Standard. 9 of diamonds. Okay. So 9. It does make us pretty committed, I would say. Checks again, I would say the same thing is true here as in the other ace king. Just gonna be very weak. So I'm just gonna jam my stack in and expect to get a fold. And sometimes maybe a call from 10s or a 9 or 8. You know, he's a recreational player, maybe. He could turn over something random here. But yeah, I would definitely encourage in the team of this topic in both spots to no locker solver and see what happens if people bet a bit too greedy and how the equilibrium changes. He even calls with ace king. Okay, I figured he would have ace king quite often, but that he calls it this next level. I guess he could. This is another spot where I feel like the check raise, check line is going to be very much weighted to what it is. Just gonna be like a turned queen X very often. And as soon as they don't balance these lines, I feel like we get to just bet a lot of ace X. I do think actually I made a mistake because I do feel like then tens is now suddenly worth way more money. So the main thing that happens if a range is unbalanced is that we can just bet the strength of our hand. And tens obviously is worth more than a quarter, and then if we have an ace, we just bet a quarter. Okay, apparently my read was wrong. And he had ace jack, I guess? Ace jack, yes. This is actually also an interesting spot that you can actually play in various ways. Don't want to get in too much details. No, not here to educate you guys, but I'm not here to tell you everything I know. But there's definitely some alternative strategies that I think are good here. Timing here, very important in this spot. Check, call, check. This is definitely a spot. The longer he times, the more I'm going to check behind. Because it says something about his range, then... And I'm definitely folding here. Especially with a club, but also when the 8 rolls off, you can have jack 9. But it's an interesting spot in terms of the longer people time, the less he just has queen 9 or king 10. And the more it's like, okay, I have a give up or I have a very strong hand that I was considering. So the faster people check, the more I want to value bet my hand. And the longer people take, the more I want to check my hand. Why is that? Because we face a different range. And therefore we have different equities, and therefore we have different incentives. As explained, I hope this video has been useful for you guys, and I promise you, when you go play sessions mainly with this question in mind, you'll suddenly see that you actually know how to play poker at a higher level. No, I'm saying this completely incorrectly, but you suddenly get broken out of your autopilot and actually start to think. And to be honest, a lot in poker is just a matter of you should start to think logically, which is a part of the brain that gets kind of shut off if you're just consuming solver outputs. We got a cold call. I don't know who this guy is, but I just started with a c-bet because my hand's quite beautiful. We'll definitely not c-bet a lot. Then 8 suited. Could we 3-bet this? Maybe some of the time. Feels a bit weak, but hey, let's go for it. Probably more against the cutoff. Very bad board for us. He calls. I'm not really sure, but I'm gonna give up. And this is probably going to be a check. I'm gonna check this board very often. He's gonna step this board very often. Yeah. I could actually maybe do something mergy here. Yeah, it's not get too funky here. Yeah, I'm just gonna give this one up. Feel like the cold call versus 3-bet range is just gonna contain too much ace-x. I can bet the turn, but then it's just gonna jam. And okay, c-bet check. What's Vin's range? Well, probably 7s or 6s or 5-6 suited. Something along those lines. Very weak hand. We should probably size down a bit. Get value from those holdings. Actually, I'm just gonna bet quarter. I think quarter is actually fine. Just simply because I think, again, the range is left unprotected and he's just gonna have 6s and 7s the majority of the time. In theory, he should definitely show up with queens, for example, jacks. And that's definitely not going to be the case, or at least not often enough versus your average opponent. And guess what he had? Yeah, pocket 6s. Knowing that, I probably blundered here myself. Knowing that he probably has pocket 6s, we should probably have just actually bet bigger. So I think I actually made a mistake there. Queens. Bit close. I feel like it's a spot where people are just gonna stab relentlessly. I do also could actually also be a recreational player. If it's a recreational player, I definitely think checking towards him is a good idea, because they're just gonna stab a lot, which is quite good for us. Here the ace-9 could value bet, but I think it's a bit thin. Let's say at ace-jack, I would definitely value bet with a club. And I'm just gonna call and call river. Could actually also lead the river. I don't mind it with queens specifically, blocking a lot of the bluffs. I feel like he could have 10x that he's going to pot control the river with. So I'm actually, or 9s. So I'm actually gonna take quite a funky line here, which I think is quite decent actually versus a recreational. Because you can use now your queens as a bluff catcher, but it's a bit too strong to use as a bluff catcher. So I feel like we should just prevent Willem from pot controlling. I feel like that there's more value in that. Mechanics of Poker coaching program, just to close it off with that. We are now open for applications. So make sure to go over to mechanicsofpoker.com if you're interested in working with me and Adam. Have us help you improve your poker career. Mechanicsofpoker.com to apply. Maybe you'll get selected to work with me and Adam. Hope you guys found this video entertaining, or educational, I must say. Maybe a little bit of both. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.